is Joshua Risner, and the title of my presentation today is Windows into Harmonious Reality. I believe that painting reveals a hidden aspect of reality. It is a process that materializes the immaterial and gives a physical presence to my thoughts, concepts, and spirit. Through a continual process of seeking and discovering, it provides me with hope for a meaningful existence. My paintings are the stimuli for and artifact of my search for hope. I will now present each of my paintings in a chronological order to demonstrate how they reveal harmony in a seemingly chaotic existence. You can see that all right. Prior to this painting that I have up here right now, my paintings were primarily intended to be arguments for the existence of things like universals, for instance, like beauty and truth. At one point in that process, I started thinking about how I should stop maybe making arguments and start trying to demonstrate those universals in my painting. And what I intended to do was somehow paint my own version of Raphael's Madonna or Leonardo's Mona Lisa. But what I found is that I wasn't capable of doing that. What I found is that through the process, not that I think that this painting is a bad painting or anything, I think that I turn this off, maybe I can this is sort of making me more comfortable because I can't screw this up. Trying to do what the great masters before me have tried to do. And what I've come to realize is that I wasn't capable of doing that because I wasn't comfortable with the simplicity of the painting. I felt as though it was constantly shallow. And it's one of the things I started thinking about as I was thinking about why I could not be subtle with presenting something so simple, was that I had these two perceptions in me. Or I perceived reality in two different ways. I sort of started thinking about those different perceptions as one being theoretical and one being practical. And how, even though I had this longing for these great things that these previous artists had presented in their work, somehow wasn't real to me. I kept doubting. I had this constant skepticism in me, this constant awareness that there was always irony involved. What that sort of led to was this next painting, where I started to think about how I could bring those two perceptions together. How can I understand, or how can I try to understand how these perceptions can coexist? You know, how do I look at reality now with these two different perceptions? Now that I have this awareness, I sort of started defining those perceptions as either one, the theoretical being sort of a medieval or a classical perception, and the other perception sort of being a modern rationalization perception, you know. And as you can see, the figure in the foreground is sort of the protagonist. She's obviously dominating the painting, and she was meant to be a sort of personification of virtue, and she was representing that classical or medieval perception that I had. The figures in the foreground that are grouped there are a reference from a Picasso painting. And his painting has come to be known to represent alienation. You see how if you look at how the figures sort of are in the grouping, yet they never seem to be able to. They're not looking at each other, or they're not actually interacting. So these two symbols, and that symbol, that the grouping sort of represented the modern perception that I had. You know, the skeptical and doubting perception, which I saw as leading to an alienation. I sort of felt like if I let this modern perception take over my theoretical classical perception, I would somehow end up in this place where I was no longer to feel like a human. I could no longer communicate with other people without these universals. Another thing that happened with this painting is that I started realizing that I wasn't necessarily making an argument. I was more seeking something. I was looking for the conclusion without really knowing what I was looking for. And I'm not sure that I come to anything in particular, but I did realize that both sides, both symbols were somehow alienated if you looked at them apart. But I tried to bring them together and show how they can coexist. one of the ways is with the arrow and the personification of virtue's hand, and then the little boy has a bow in the back. And I sort of wanted to show that they're both alienated. They both lead to some sort of alienation from humanity without seeing them together. This painting became a turning point. One of the little symbols, I'm sorry you can't see this close up, but there's a symbol in the background of a bathing figure, and I sort of felt like this painting represented the state, like a cleansing of my desire to hold on to what I was thinking previously. I had a new awareness. And there's also a path that's leading into I saw this representing hope. Now the next painting, I sort of accepted the fact that I had these two perceptions, but I had this sense of loss, and I tried to understand what that loss was. This loss of the ideal, you know, this loss of letting the theoretical or the medieval and classical perception dominate my judgments on reality. And what I started thinking about is the idea of a fallen saint. I started to think about if, you know, myself, if somehow this is not me, this is another figure, some people have said it's me, but it does represent ideas that I have. But I started thinking about how at some point I felt like I had given up the battle, that I had resigned, and that I had how was I to deal with that? What were the implications of this new awareness? And I sort of set up this scenario where there was this figure, this protagonist figure that was interacting with something in the background, a symbol, and that symbol was meant to represent both ways of perceiving it, or several, like a multidimensional way of seeing a particular symbol. And the symbol I have in the background, you can probably barely see it as a scarecrow. But I also wanted that to represent a crucifix too, and I feel like depending on what perception you're looking at, a symbol like that, you know, let's say in theory, if I think of it as a symbol, I would see like a crucifix, and I would think of salvation or grace or these types of things. But if I think of it as a scarecrow, I think of fear and maybe Halloween or these different types of things. And I started feeling like that, my inability to recognize the difference was somehow pushing me to this loss, or I was sensing this loss, because with holding on to one perception, I had a greater sense of stability, you know. This is sort of in the same vein. This painting was based on the story of St. George and the Dragon. I started thinking about the fallen saint as being sort of a Peter Pan character, as though reality was only what he had in his mind, like he was fabricating it. But I couldn't accept that. I couldn't, because I still had this theoretical perception, you know. I still thought that there had to be some objective value, and wasn't just something that I was fabricating in my reality. I did the same thing in the background with this secondary symbol that the figure is interacting with. I thought of the idea of a combine, and how the combine to some people, depending on what your perception is, can represent the bounty of harvest. And to farmers, or country, people that live in the country, a combine is not threatening in any sort of way. It's a positive thing, and probably is a source of pride. But I also thought of the sense of how a combine can represent harvest, and how harvest can represent death. And somebody that's not even familiar with a combine can be completely intimidated by the largeness of and the process of the combine. And I tried to emphasize that with showing that it wasn't meant to have the combine burning. I actually was having behind it burning, but I wanted people to perceive it as it was burning. Back to the foreground figure. The one thing I was focusing on with this figure is the idea that this guy had now become aware that St. George had now become aware that his sword was really just a stick, and how he was to deal with that. I have an apple in the foreground sitting beside him there, apple core, and that's a symbol that I've used that referenced the fall prior, and I would keep that apple whole as an idea of holding on to an ideal, onto ideals, and it's somehow during the fall biting onto an apple, which some will say is a pomegranate, whatever. The idea is that taking this action has somehow made me aware of something, and that's not necessarily a good thing. And I was wrestling with that, and that's what that apple has to do with the scene there. Somehow, by him taking a bite out of this apple, he is now aware of the reality of his situation. This sort of goes back after I had I was dealing with my sense of loss and thinking about my new awareness. I started to think about how I started to feel like I wanted to embrace it a little bit more. I started thinking about how symbols incorporating these a variety of meanings, that doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't necessarily lead to relativism. Somehow these symbols can inherently have all of these meanings, and it's part of the mystery of life. And I started embracing this mystery, thinking about, well, maybe the reason that I can't understand it is because I'm not God, or I'm not the creator, or I'm not meant to understand this. So I started embracing this mystery. And this particular painting, I was thinking of the main figure was an Isis, was meant to represent an Isis sort of character, or Mother Nature. I was thinking of the cycle of life and how life is sort of a symbol that has this dual meaning in it. As we're living, we're constantly dying. It's the same exact thing, or it's the symbol that has both of these meanings. It's hard to know if you're living or you're dying at the same time. That's why I was focusing on the cycle of life, and this is sort of meant to represent that. In the back, I have like a dead animal that a crow is devouring there, that the footprints are leading from, to the very same place where like an apple is growing, or an apple tree is growing from the seeds from the apple core. This just was this image was meant to help me to try to embrace this idea of mystery. There's a sleeping wolf in the background there. That is a reference to a painting by Franz Marc that I wanted to add another symbol to kind of bring those two things together, that cycle. I wanted that wolf to represent both things as like the threat of alarm, or a threat of danger if the wolf was to wake up, or the fact that he's sleeping in it, it's a rock, just maybe you were just perceiving it as a wolf. This next painting is just a continuation of my acceptance of this new perception, and how to make judgments on reality based on both of these. How to make judgments for my painting, for my relationships, everything that I was interacting with. And the painting in the back, the figure in the background is a reference to a painting by Manet called Luncheon on the Grass. I am the belief that Manet, whether he was intentional or not, was promoting a materialistic philosophy. He was looking to all things that could be rationalized, or anything that could be verified. And his paintings represented that by promoting a flat surface, as opposed to like the Renaissance or medieval paintings that were promoting, a window into another world. And so I used that as a reference in the background, and showed the figure which was bathing before in Manet's painting as digging into the earth, as representing this practical perception of looking to our experiences for information, or how to make judgments. And I used myself in the foreground, looking to the heavens or to the sky, to something else that was without eyes, to represent that theoretical or medieval and classical perception that I had, and somehow trying to bring those together again in this painting. This is the final painting of my undergrad. What I was thinking with this painting is how, like, through the last 4 years I've come to have a bigger worldview. I've come to hold multiple perceptions in my hand, and know how to know what percentages to use based on the context of what